This is your story. This is my story. But most of all, this is the greatest story ever told. This is God's story.
1, 2, 3, 4.
When the turn came for Esther to go to the king, she asked for nothing other than what Haggai, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the harem, suggested. And Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. She was taken to King Xerxes in the royal residence in the 10th month, the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. Now the king was attracted to Esther more than any of the other women, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his nobles and officials. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts with royal liberality. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. But Esther had kept secret her family background and nationality, just as Mordecai had told her to do, for she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up. During the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And the report was investigated and found to be true. The two officials were impaled on poles. All this was recorded in the book of the Annals in the presence of the king.
Well, good morning, everyone. So I just want to say something, and I don't want you guys to take this the wrong way, but last week, this room was pretty full. And we had baby dedication. And I think the only obvious follow-up is that some of you need to have more babies. I'm just saying. Pierces, you've only had 4. I'm teasing, obviously, but, it is what it is. We have been in this series on the story. We've been talking about the singular story of God's work on earth as told through the Bible, trying to see the stories not just as individual lessons and morals, but as an entire story of how God sought out humanity. And last week, we'd been talking about how the people got to go home, right? There was the exile, Babylon came and conquered them, and then a new empire arose, and I believe I've got a page. Who was the empire we are now talking about that took over the area? There was Assyria, then Babylon, and now who? Persia. Thank you, guys. Persia comes in and they say, okay, you guys can go home, specifically a guy by the name of Cyrus. And many of them did. They got to go back to their homeland. They got out of their exile and got to go back to Jerusalem, and they rebuilt an altar and they rebuilt the temple, and guys like Haggai came and encouraged them to do these things. And it all worked out really, really well, and there was a lot of good news to talk about. However, today we have to acknowledge one truth about this. And that is that not everyone got to go home right away. The truth is, there were several migrations of people back to the Promised Land, and even then, Israelites continued to live to some degree all over the world. And so there continued to be people following God faithfully in faraway lands, proclaiming his story, teaching his messages and his scriptures to other people. And they had to live in lands that were not necessarily as open to them or their message, or were okay with their continuing to be faithful to the God of Israel. And so there were constant disagreements. There were hardships. There were times when they had to hide their identities, times when they had to go full forth with courage and talk about where they came from and who their God was. And this reality honestly reflects our lives better than anything else in the Bible. We, like the Israelites who did not get to go home, continue to live our lives for God wherever we are, in places that seem to be almost increasingly less friendly to us. Have you ever felt that reality? And we have to somehow prove to be faithful, even though we are not of those who got to return. We live in foreign places with a struggle of trying to live for Him. Truth be told, that image of being foreigners in another land is the image that inspired the early church. I don't know if you know that, but go back and read some of the New Testament authors. In particular, I'm thinking of 1 Peter in chapter 2, when he looks at, or he's writing to these people, trying to give them some encouragement. And here is how he words it. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11. This is what Peter, one of the earliest leaders of the church, said. He says, "Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your soul." He even says, "Live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day He visits us." Peter acknowledges that we are the foreigners and the exiles, that we live in a world unfriendly to us, and that we, as long as we are alive, do not get to go home yet. Because our home is somewhere that we hope to be someday when all of this is over. And because we are foreigners and exiles, we seek to live our life better, so that the people around us may hear the word of our God and someday praise Him with us. And I say that because this week, I know for many of us, the world felt just a little less friendly than it did a week ago. There have been a lot of things in the news and things that have happened that may make you feel uneasy. And I just want to remind you, you're not home yet. We are the foreigners. We are the exiles. We are the ones trying our best to live faithfully to God in a world that may increasingly be less friendly to it. And that's okay. Because behind all the seeming chaos around us is a God who's in control of it. And that's the story we tell today. If you've got your Bibles, I want you to turn to the book of Esther. Esther is a powerful story in which it appears that Esther is living in exile. You know, she is in essentially Babylon, or actually Persia at this point. And God is not at the forefront. It's not as obvious that God is leading affairs as He is in Jerusalem. But even in the other places of the world, God has control that goes beyond the chaos that seems to be at the forefront. And that is at least part of what Esther's story is about. And in the end, we find out that, you know what, there's a reason she hadn't gone home yet. And God was going to use her where she was. And I suggest that that's the truth for each of us as well. So let's get into it. Let's get into the book of Esther. Now, Esther can be broken down. It's not a very long book. It's 10 chapters. I suggest you go back and read it. But you can really kind of break down the different sections. And I'm doing this just so you get an idea of what all we have to kind of cover in a short amount of time. Chapter 1 is essentially the setup. It's the story of a big party being thrown. And how ultimately it leads to Queen Vashti being set aside and needing to find a new queen. In chapter 2, we meet the heroes of our story, a guy by the name of Mordecai, and of course the new queen whose name is what? Esther. Chapter 3, we meet the villain, who's a guy by the name of Haman. Chapter 4, this is not the best name, but chapter 4 and 5 essentially are the contemplation. It's what are we going to do? How are we going to handle this situation? Chapter 6 and 7 are the great reversal of fortunes, in which the plan that was laid out to hurt Israel is caught up in a grand reversal. And then chapters 8 through 10 sort of finish the story and talk about how Israel conquered their enemies and established a new holiday, which is at least one of the purposes of this book. So this is kind of the outline in my head, but let's kind of jump into it, okay? Let's start with number 1, the setup. Here's what happens. There's a guy by the name of King Xerxes, and he is hosting a long, months-long time of celebration. He is treating his nobility to a banquet, which, by the way, banquets appear all throughout this book. And he is liberally administering the alcohol. And he's probably trying to win them over for some new campaign, perhaps a military campaign. The book doesn't talk about that, but we have some guesses from history. And Xerxes is treating them to this months-long party with plenty of alcohol and a lot going on. And one particular night, it gets a little out of hand. It is honestly a humorous story if you read it with the right lens. But here are the guys getting together, and Xerxes, wanting to impress them with all he has, remembers that there's one thing he hasn't impressed them with yet: his wife. And in true trophy wife fashion, he wants to bring her out and show her off to all of the nobility. Now, he's probably a little under the influence here. And so he sends off messengers to go get Queen Vashti and have her wear her royal crown in front of them. And it perhaps could be even a little more suggestive than that. And when he does, Queen Vashti has the nerve to what? Anyone know? Refuse. Which does not go well for her, but I understand her dilemma. She says no. The reason I say it's kind of humorous is that the men are sort of beside themselves, sort of asking questions like, wait a minute, is she allowed to say no? And they're sort of got this conversation going on. And so he seeks the advice of his advisors. And there's this really interesting conversation that, I'm sorry, I find humorous. It's in chapter 1, verse 16, and the conversation goes like this. Then Memucan, that's one of the advisors, replied, in the presence of the king and the nobles, Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only against the king, but against all the nobles and the people of all the provinces of King Xerxes. In other words, she didn't just wrong you, she wronged all of us. We keep going, verse 17. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, and so they will despise their husbands and say, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come. Verse 18, and here's where you get to the kicker. This very day, the Persian and Median women of the nobility who have heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way, and there will be no end of the disrespect and discord. If we let this one woman get away with it, all chaos will break loose. This is apparently getting at the core of how all men think, maybe. I don't know. Not me, I don't think that way. But if we let one woman get away with it, all of civilization will be over. Seems a little bit over the top to me, but whatever. This creates the stage, right? And so now Queen Vashti is deposed, meaning she is gotten rid of, which now leaves a position open to be the queen, or you might even say the king's favorite. And so they begin this search, and they go throughout the empire, calling young women to come before the king, to go through a year-long process of being prepared, to be essentially auditioned, and then one to be chosen to be the new queen. And that's where, section 2, we meet our heroes. Our heroes consist of a guy named Mordecai. Mordecai is already a servant of the king in the palace area. And so he has some level of influence, but he's kind of low level. And Mordecai happens to be a Jew. And he happens to have adopted a young Jewish woman, probably a niece or a cousin of his, who has the name Hadassah, but later takes the name what? Esther. And Esther is a beautiful young woman, and Mordecai gets this idea in his mind that he should suggest her to go into this contest to be the new queen. And as you might suspect, it all goes very, very well. Since he works in the the palace area, Mordecai is able to go back and forth to find out what's going on, to give her coaching. And she listens to his advice. For one, she doesn't reveal her background, doesn't reveal that she is a Jew. And all this goes on, and essentially the king selects her as the favorite from amongst all the women who appeared. And all of a sudden, we now have a Jewish queen. Actually, I should say a secret Jewish queen. But this sets the stage now for more things to happen. Another event of note, Mordecai, while doing all this traipsing around, finding out and trying to give her coaching, also overhears something else. He overhears a plot against the king. He reports it, and they are able to prevent it from going any further, which also raises some other things that are going to come back. So we've got the setup, we've met our heroes, and now we've got to meet our villain. The villain is a guy by the name of Haman, and Haman is listed in very strong language as an enemy of the Jews. He's actually called an Agagite, which is an archaic term by this point, referring to an old king of an old enemy of the Jews, meaning that when they called him that, they knew what they were doing. They were saying, this guy is bad news, before you ever even hear anything else about him. And Haman is bad news, okay? He has this rivalry with Mordecai because Mordecai is sort of a influence on the king, or he's coming into that role. And Haman is his number one right-hand man advisor. And Haman does not want to lose that position. It is a coveted position to be the king's right-hand man. And so Haman sees Mordecai as a threat, and he doesn't like that Mordecai doesn't bow to him or give him the honor that he thinks he is supposed to have. And so he makes this plan. And it's kind of an interesting plan. By the way, this is about 5 years after Esther has been queen. And he basically takes what we'll call, for all intents and purposes, a dice. And he rolls the dice. And this is, in the ancient world, a way of not really randomizing, but divining, calling on the gods. And through this rolling of the dice, or the casting of the lot, as they would say, he picks a date. And that date becomes very key. Because for him, that is the date. And think of the pride of this man, that he can cast his dice, come up with a date, and he says to himself, that's the day I'm going to destroy not only Mordecai, but all Jews. That's the day. Roll the dice, and I'll make it happen. He really thinks he has the king on his side, does he not? And so we meet Haman, the enemy who has cast the lot, decided the day, and is going to make all of these bad things happen. And after he does, he goes to the king and he sets his plan in motion. This is chapter 3, verses 8 and 9. Haman said to King Xerxes, there is a certain people dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom who keep themselves separate. Who would that be, by the way? The Jews. They do tend to keep themselves separate because they have the scriptures of a God who is the one and only God over all the universe, who demands that they be different and holy and separate from all the other peoples, who gives them rules like not working on the seventh day of the week and honoring certain festivals and doing things a certain way. They are people who kind of stand out. And he makes the king aware of these Jews. He says their customs are different from those of all other people. They do not obey the king's laws. And he says it is not in the king's best interest to what? Tolerate them. He's got an agenda. He says, yes, there are these people. They're different. They don't fit into the world the way you have established it. They stand out. They have these other goals and these other things and these other values in mind, and that's not okay, and you shouldn't tolerate it, king. We keep going. Verse 9, if it pleases the king, he says, let a decree be issued to destroy them. And he says, and I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal treasury. Does that sound bribe-ish to you? That's because it is a bribe. 10,000 talents of silver, just so you know, is probably like a third or half of the budget of the entire empire, which is mostly the entire known world at the time. It is such a large bribe that either Haman is filthy rich, or he's planning to conquer the Jews, take all of their money, and give it to the palace. Probably the latter. The point being that there is a monetary value set now on the people of God. And while it looks like chaos, and it looks like someone rolled the dice and is going to let happen to God's people who didn't get to go home some terrible, terrible thing, we find out that behind the scenes, God is working and has been working to set them free. And so God protects them even in this moment. And it's a really fascinating moment. The next section is, I called it the contemplation, because there's a lot that they have to think about how to respond. And it begins with Mordecai. Mordecai, hearing this news that the king is going to destroy the Jews, goes into a season of mourning. He goes out walking around the temple area and around the city of Susa in full mourning clothes, to the point that it's catching a lot of people's attention, even catching the attention of his cousin, Queen Esther, who wonders what in the world is Mordecai doing, which then creates a conversation to contemplate how they will move forward. And all this time, Mordecai has told her not to reveal her background. Don't reveal that you are a Jew. It won't help you in this case. And now all of a sudden, Mordecai is telling her, you need to reveal who you are. Tell the king your background. Save us from what's happening. And there's this fascinating conversation going on between the two of them. I'm going to pick up in chapter 4 and verse 10. Then she being Esther, this is part of the conversation going back and forth, utilizing servants, instructed him, the servant, to say to Mordecai. Esther instructed the servant to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law. And what is that? What was it? I'm sorry, I don't hear well. They be put to death. Meaning that you don't just come to the king with an idea, not even the queen. You have to be invited to come to the king. Otherwise, you die. With one exception. Unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But she wants him to know one other thing. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. It's been 5 years. She may not still be the favorite. She may, in fact, be less favored than she was. She doesn't know if she can do anything to change this. It says, it's not likely for me to be called into his presence again, which would mean I'd have to take it into my own hands. Verse 12. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. And here he gives the motivating speech, right? This is kind of a key moment. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, that you alone of all the Jews will escape. He says in verse 14, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. That's a lot of faith, by the way. But you and your father's family will perish, and who knows but that you have come to your royal position for what? For such a time as this. I've always loved that verse. It gives you that idea of destiny, that idea that God put you where you are for a reason, that you have come to the position you are in for a reason, for God to save his people from destruction. And in this case, I dare say, since many Israelites have returned home, but they have been stuck here in Susa, serving a foreign king in an unfriendly land, I'd like to turn it around and say this. Maybe there's a reason you haven't gone home yet. Maybe there's a reason you didn't get to go back to Jerusalem with all the other Jews. Maybe there's a reason you're still here in a foreign land, suffering under people who don't understand your background. Maybe in the place you are, God can use you. And when I look at fellow believers, and I remember that for so many of us, we would like to, maybe even prefer to be home right now. I don't mean at your houses. I mean home with our God. Maybe there's a reason you're still here on earth. Maybe God has something to use you for. Maybe, just maybe, behind all this chaos that seems to be going on in our world and all the bad news, maybe there's a reason that God can use you in a broken world to share his news. Maybe he can even use you to save people. Because it is not the roll of the dice that determines the fate of God's people, but the decision of an all-knowing God who works in the seeming chaos and brings about his will. Who knows but that you have come to this place and remain in this place for just this time. And so they contemplate and they think about it and they decide what to do. And finally, she agrees to attempt it. And so she goes in the hallway, looking into the throne room, the king there, wanting to know if he's either going to raise his royal scepter and let her in or not and let her die. She stands in front of that room, and thankfully, by the grace of God, he raises up that scepter, he lets her in, and they have this conversation. And essentially, all she does for now is invite him to a banquet. I prepared a banquet for you. Let you, and by the way, your number one advisor, whose name is what? Haman, come to this banquet. And so they do, and they come to this banquet, and she's prepared this nice thing. She's got a lot of savvy to her, does she not? I've prepared a party for you. Come on. I know you like parties. I heard about it. And then at the party, he says, and what is it that you want? And she says, well, come to one more party the next night. And they set up this night of this fancy banquet. And once again, it's just three people. It's going to be Esther, it's going to be the king, King Xerxes, and it's going to be his number one advisor, Haman. And we've set up the moment that is going to change everything, what I call the great reversal. This is a fascinating moment. Meanwhile, Haman is feeling pretty good about himself. In fact, he's feeling so good about himself that tomorrow he's going to ask the king to finally murder and get rid of that nasty Mordecai the Jew that he doesn't like. And he sets up this impressively high pole. It's said to be 50 cubits, about 75 feet. Highly unnecessary that it be that large, on which he wants to impale Mordecai. But the reversal of fortunes all starts because the king can't sleep that night, the night before the big banquet. I'm picking up now in Esther chapter 7. I'm sorry, 6, chapter 6, chapter 6, verse 1. That night the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It's like he wanted a bedtime story. But as he does, he finds something out. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. Oh yeah, remember I told you that something like that happened early on while he was trying to coach Esther. Verse 3, what honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this, the king asked. Nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered. Now, just as they are discovering this, Haman comes walking in, ready to make his request. And what is his request? To have Mordecai impaled on a 50-cubit high pole. And the misunderstanding here is, can I use the word delicious? It's delicious, okay? Jumping down to chapter 7 I'm still in chapter 6, verse 6. When Haman entered, the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? And it tells you right up front. Now Haman thought to himself, who is there the king would rather honor than who? Me. So he starts thinking up ways to honor himself. And he does a good job with it, I must say. He does a very good job. So he answered the king, for the man the king delights to honor, me, have them bring a royal robe to the king has worn, and a horse that the king has ridden, and one with a royal crest placed on its head. And then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. And let them robe the man the king delights to honor and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor, me. And the deliciousness of this moment is unbelievable. Go down to verse 10. Go at once, the king commanded Haman, get the robe and the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew. Oh yeah, by the way, I was going to ask you something. What was that? Who sits at the king's gate? He even says, do not neglect anything you have recommended. Mordecai's day is kind of ruined. He now has to spend the entire morning marching a horse with his arch enemy, Mordecai. Sorry, Haman's day is ruined. And proclaiming how much the king loves Mordecai. It's a very humiliating ritual for Haman, who thought he had the upper hand. And so he has to go this whole day doing all this and then comes home and complains to his wife. But thankfully, his day is not over. He has one other thing to look forward to. Remember, he was the only one invited to go to this big banquet with Esther and the king. Okay, finally, this bad is behind, and now he gets to go to a wonderful banquet and be honored as the king and the queen's guest, right? Wrong. because this banquet doesn't really go very well for him either. And so they appear at this banquet. It's the king and the queen and Haman, and all seems to be going well. The king looks at Esther and says, okay, finally, tell us, what is it that you want? Reveal to us what it is that you have been trying to say these 2 days. And she says, well, to be honest, the one thing I would ask of you, King, if you are so willing, if you really do like me and value me, is please don't kill me. He's like, what? I mean, not just me, but like all of my people, because there's this evil person who wants to destroy us. And you know, if they were only going to enslave us, I wouldn't even bother you, King, but killing us seems a little harsh, and I just thought maybe, King, if you actually like me, you might actually stop this. And the king is like worked up and angry at this point. He's like, well, who is it? Who is it that that wants to hurt you and all of your people? Tell me now, and I will take care of this. She says, well, it's this guy. Going down to chapter 7, here's how it comes out, verse 5. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he? The man who has dared to do such a thing. And Esther said, an adversary, an enemy, the vile Haman. And then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. And the king is so worked up, he just has to step away for a minute. You ever done that? Been so angry, you just had to step away before you said something that you don't want to say? Very few of you seem to have anger issues. I am surprised. But the king gets up and he walks away, and in the meantime, Haman, who is a rather sneaky person, knows the only thing he has left, the only card he can play, is to go and beg Queen Esther for his life. And so he comes stumbling over to her in a hurry, falls face first onto the couch on which she is laying. Now talk about a misunderstanding. The king walks back in, sees her face in the lap of the queen, begging for his life, and thinks maybe something else is going on. And it's this really incredible moment, going down to verse 8. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. And the king exclaimed, will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house? And as soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. I don't know if you've ever seen an old movie, but in the ancient world, when they cover your face up, what is about to happen? You're going to be executed. And in fact, it all works out beautifully. Going down, I think it's verse 9. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending to the king, said, oh, I almost forgot. A pole reaching to the height of 50 cubits stands by Haman's house. Oh yeah, that is convenient. He had it set up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. And the king said what? Impale him on it. And so they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. And then the king's fury subsided. This delicious moment of reversal demonstrates God's hand, that he put Esther where she was, not because she was so beautiful, but because he needed to use her to save the people. And this leads to the last section, which I'm not even going to spend a lot of time on, but essentially they have to issue another law that will allow the Israelites to protect themselves and to take out their enemies who try to destroy them. And the day has to be the day that that Haman chose. Remember, he cast the dice? It's that same day. It's the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. And that becomes a day in which they are able to fight their enemies and win. In fact, in the city, it was continued on to the 14th day. And when that happens, they realize God's goodness in protecting them, and they declare it a national holiday, the holiday being Purim. Purim. Purim comes from the word pure, which is a word for the lot, i.e., casting the dice. I think the lesson is that when it seems chaotic or it seems by chance, it's actually God who controls where the dice land. And even though none of this feels really like a Christian story, it is absolutely a story of God in the background utilizing someone who hadn't gotten to go home to save his people from absolute destruction. When we live faithfully for God where we are, even as foreigners and exiles, God protects his people. And though the news may feel chaotic these days, God is still on his throne. God still controls how every dice falls and everything that happens. And in the end, God protects his people. And those are the people he uses to someday complete his kingdom and populate that meal that one day we're all going to eat together with him. That is what we look forward to. That is the good news. It's what Jesus' story will continue to advance and what we advance in and through the work of the church. God is still rescuing his people, not always from physical enemies, but from every bad thing in your life. God wants to rescue you and make you a part of the people of God. If you will, bow your heads. Lord, we are blessed to be your people if we truly commit to that. We know that some of us maybe would rather be somewhere else in life, but maybe we are where we are because you have some purpose for it. And I pray that we will look out and we will look to you to find that purpose, to know where you are acting, and to willingly and joyfully be a part of your saving hurting people. Let us be those who evangelize. Let us be those who model grace. Let us be those who go out in this community and restore that which is broken. And may you rescue people from darkness. And in the seeming chaos, may we remember that ultimately you reign. So let us be faithful where we are, even as foreigners and exiles in a world that does not love you. But let us love you all the more because of it. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.
Let's stand.